is quite. I want to talk about organ donation. Now, I want to make it very clear before we start. This is obviously not a shiur in halacha l'maaseh, in practical halacha. At the end of our discussion today, we will not have a practical guidelines. Now I know what to do. What we will have is, I hope, we'll have, shalom aleichem, Moishala, what a joy to see you. Moishala, I miss learning with you today.
Yeah, because I was replaced today.
It was very difficult. I coped, but it wasn't easy.
According to the list, it was replaced.
Somebody
was supposed to be in my place.
You are irreplaceable. But we'll talk about that another day. Anyway, so we have over here organ. So it's not halacha l'maaseh, but I think it is an important value discussion about the value of life in Jewish teachings, how ancient halachic ideas are applied to very modern situations, and how in light of modern medical developments, halakha adapts when the situation changes. That's really the things that we're going to get out of our discussion. But it's not, like you might have a shiur in the laws of how to make tzitzit, or you might have a shiur on making brachot, and then that's very practical. Here, it's more about the values that emerge from our discussion. Okay, so I'm going to give out sheets, and then I'm going to explain what we're going to do. Here are some source sheets. And it looks like we're running out. It's a great joy to run out of source sheets. Can't explain what a joy that is. I think Rabbi Listman has a prophecy, because it's the right... Oh, no, very good. You get your share. Oh, that's good. Okay, so there are really three sections. The first section is we're going to talk about values of, why it might be a mitzvah, why it might be a problem to be involved in organ donation. The second section is we're going to talk about defining the end of life in halakha, which is really a key issue. So first part is sort of halachic factors to support organ donation, halachic factors against organ donation. Then after that, talk about defining the end of life. Because as you know, many of the organs that people donate have to be donated at a time when the organ is still viable. So understanding how to define the end of life, that's the second section. And then the third section is modern halachic rulings on the issue of organ transplants. Joy? Happiness? Okay. So we're going to start with 4 reasons why it might be a problem to be involved in organ donation. As I said, none of what we're saying is halacha l'maaseh. If anyone wants to discuss halacha l'maaseh, you should have a discussion with your rabbi, the person that issues, from whom you get your halachic rulings. But this is a general discussion. We have the luxury of discussing it on a theoretical basis, just to understand halachic concepts. Okay, so the first problem is that a dead body you're not allowed to derive benefit from a dead body. This is halakha. It's in the Shulchan Aruch, but it appears in the Bet Yosef. The Bet Yosef, this is source number 1, tells us, met v'tachrichav, a dead body, and also the clothing of a dead body, asurin b'hana'ah. They are not allowed to derive benefit from somebody who is not allowed, somebody who's passed away. And then we're told later on in this, the Bet Joseph, D'lo shana ben matei goy lematei Yisrael. There's no difference between a Jew or a non-Jew over here. You're not allowed to derive benefit from a dead body. I might remind everybody that we are created, every human being is created b'tselem Elokim, created in God's image, and therefore there is great sanctity attributed to a dead body. As I think we may have discussed in another context, if there's a fire in a house, and the house has a dead body in it, and has a Sefer Torah in it, do you know which one you save first?
burning house with a body and the right?
Exactly. Do you know which
Yeah,
one
dead
comes
body
first?
or a-
Dead body comes first. You would take the dead body out first to prevent the dead body from being burnt. Why? Because the dead body is created. Every human being is created b'tzelem Elokim. So that's why we're not allowed to derive benefit from a dead body. The second source is from a pasuk in Devarim. Now, it's very important to contextualize this pasuk. This pasuk is talking about a person who is put to death. It's someone who's liable for the death penalty. So we're not talking about a very righteous person. We're talking about somebody who is put to death. He's stoned or he's hanged, whatever. Well, no, that's not. Skila, sreifa, herek, v'cherek. One of the four capital punishments. A person is put to death, and then after he's put to death, the body, really, I suppose, as a warning, is shown to the people so as to make sure everybody understands the seriousness of the offence and would be wary not to transgress the same offence. So Torah tells us, "Lo talin nivlato ala etz ki kavor tikvarenu bayomahu." You're not allowed to hang the body. Rather, you have to bury that person on that same day. Why can you not display the body? Why can't you hang the body? Ki kilalat elokim talui. Because it is it's like a bad reflection on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi on this pasuk tells us a crazy story. Quoted, it's based on a midrash, but Rashi tells us the story of was actually a Gemara in Sanhedrin of two brothers, one, and they were two twin brothers, two identical twin brothers. One of the twins becomes the king, and the other twin becomes the opposite, like a huge gangster. And the gangster gets caught up and is killed, right? And then the people want to take this body of the gangster and display it. Or like they want to hang the gangster. If people look at the gangster, and they'll think that the gangster might be the king. You follow? And therefore the king ordered, don't do anything to the gangster because it is a sign of disrespect for the king, because that guy looks just like the king. You follow? On that, and it's a very, very powerful point, each of us, is created in God's image. And therefore any delay of a burial or any desecration of the is an inappropriate way to treat the dead body.
I have a question. What about this verse in contrast with Rambam? The principle of Rambam that Hashem does not have an image.
So it's very difficult to understand what Tselem Elokim means.
Yeah, okay.
I don't understand. I'll just tell you one thing. Oh, here we have a Kabbalistic person over here. I'll tell you one idea. I'm not sure. I'm going to say the words, and then hopefully somebody over here will understand a little bit what this means. About really, the question is about
anthropomorphic.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying this. Anthropomorphicness, meaning seeing God with a physical body, right? Thank you so much, David. You are such a superstar. Okay, so we believe that God doesn't have a body. Nachon, we say it every day in Yigdal. Ein lo guf, ein lo nachon. Okay, however, like this. This thing over here, this is called my hand. In Hebrew, it's called yad, right? Yad. Now, the yad, this hand is called a yad because it is the combination of the letter yud and the letter dalad, meaning the word yad is the recipe for this object over here. And the recipe for this thing over here is if you put the letter resh and the aleph and a shin, that makes the word rosh, and that's this thing over here. So it's true that God doesn't have a physical image, but somehow the like the physical manifestation of putting these letters together is what creates a human body. You follow? So of course God doesn't have a human body, but there is somehow the human body is related, is connected somehow to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. You follow? Of course, and also everybody has got a divine soul inside them, whatever that means. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Oh, we could talk about this for a long time, but it's really not our topic about the relationship between a body and a soul and understanding how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in God's image. But we see from the second source that there is holiness in the human body. And therefore, delay of burial is inappropriate, like our story of the twins. Now, I'll tell you a very, very scary question that I heard asked like about a week or two ago. During the course of the last few terrible weeks of battle between good and evil, between the Jewish people and our enemies, many of the terrorists, Yamach Shemam, were killed. And the question was asked to Rabbi, sort of many of the soldiers, as you know, religious people, and they asked their rabbis, what is our obligation towards the dead bodies of the enemy combatants? Like a guy that just tried to kill Jews, and we managed, Baruch Hashem, to kill them. What do you do with that body? What's our requirement with that body? Do you have a requirement to bury the body? Can you destroy the body? Can you what do you do with the body? And the answer is really in this pasuk over here. It's so hard to understand this, but every human psychologically it's hard to understand, but you have to understand that this is a halakha, and we are humane people. We have to always, you always have to do the right thing. We have an obligation to bury them. Now, you don't have to have a ceremony, and you don't turn the grave into a shrine, but it's a human body. We were created in God's image, and therefore, as a like Yirei Hashem, as a God-fearing soldier, I have a responsibility to take these dead bodies of people that may have done horrendous things, but tachlis, just like the pasuk over here, the dead body has to be buried, and you can't do anything inappropriate to the dead body. Sometimes Israel will bury them and then use them if there was an extreme in the
From dust to came, from dust to return.
Nachon, exactly. All of us. But it's a very powerful application of this pasuk over here. But it also maintains our dignity and our humanity. You follow? To be a halachic soldier means following halakha at all times, even when it can be incredibly challenging. But that's what a dignified Ben Torah does when they are in a wartime. We have an obligation to bury even the even enemy combatants. You might, I don't know, think these are like sort of and they are terrible people, but you still have to treat the body with respect. Huh? Ken, exactly. Okay.
It's too much. It's too much.
Oh, you want to breathe? Yeah, no, breathing is good.
No hair.
Okay.
Getting too much.
Thank you. Okay.
Turn it off.
So these are the first two reasons not to, you have to treat a body with respect. The third thing is nivul hamet. Nivul hamet is the question of doing, in halakha, we're not allowed to do autopsies for the same reason that you have to treat a dead body with respect. We had a discussion, you might remember, when we spoke about pikuach nefesh, about are you allowed to do an autopsy? Do you remember that question? I'll remind you. I'm going to remind David of the. So we're not allowed to do autopsies. These are all three reasons to make it problematic to do an organ transplant. You follow? Because you can't delay the burial, you can't derive benefit, You can't cut up. You can't do an autopsy. An autopsy, obviously, you'd have to do an autopsy to remove the organ. You follow? These are all three arguments not to allow organ transplants. And the fourth reason is stealing, and that is, who's it belong to? Who is the owner of this organ? Are you allowed to take it without, without the family's permission? I don't know. I'm not sure who you would need to consult, but the question is, would it be permitted? Okay, is that all clear? Those are all reasons against organ donation, but general ideas. All of these ideas, as you understand, can be pushed aside with the concept of pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh means that if you're not doing one of the three cardinal sins, and those are avodah zarah, gilui arayot, or shvichut damim, that is to say, idol worship, inappropriate relationships, or death. Thank you so much. Thank you, Yisrael. If you know that you're not committing murder, none of these objections involve any of those three. If you're saving a life, all of those concerns are pushed away. And I'll give you the classic example from which we understand that you're allowed to push aside all of these concerns for the sake of saving a life. It's not on the sheet, but I'll tell you a story. I'm jogging David's memory, and then for all of the rest of you, you'll remember. It's a really very interesting story. There was a rabbi who lived in the 19th century, 1800s. Machon, 1800s, that's 19th century. He lived in the 1800s he lived in the 18th century, 1700s. Like, I think he died in 1785 or something like that. His name was Rav Yecheskel Landau. Rav Yecheskel Landau was the chief rabbi of Prague. During the 18th century, Prague was the center of Jewish life. And the 18th century, as you probably know, was the beginning of enlightenment, emancipation. Sort of the ghetto walls were starting to crumble down in Europe. And the questions in general are asked of the Nodab Yehuda. That's the name of Rav Yecheskel Landau's book. It's called the Nodab Yehuda. The questions that were asked to him were, in general, questions about integration into the general society, and are a fantastic guide from then until today, because he was a rabbi at such an important time in Jewish history. Anyway, so the Nodab Yehuda, just by the by, his name was Yecheskel Landau, and his book is called Nodab Yehuda. So why, if his name's Yecheskel, often people name books with their names, but his father was called Yehuda. It was his way of showing respect for his father. He called the book, the Nodab Yehuda, is the name of the book that he wrote, Rabbi Yecheskel Landau. He was asked a question, and the question is from London, although you never lived in London, probably. Never mind. Anyway.
I lived in London.
Did you? Oh, here we are.
Oxford, I was from Yorkshire.
Excellent, brilliant, excellent.
I'm from Yorkshire.
Yeah, you don't look like someone from Yorkshire.
I'm from Yorkshire.
Yeah.
I was lived there.
That's amazing. So we're going to go to London now. A question was asked by a Jewish doctor in London. A guy had gallstones, and unfortunately, the doctors tried to operate on him to remove his gallstones, but the operation didn't work, and the person on whom the operation was performed became an alav shalom. He didn't survive the operation. Now, after the operation, the doctors wanted to know what went wrong. Like, it's not like what happened, what did we do wrong in this procedure? But we can't just cut up a body to see what's going on. So they wrote a question to Rav Yecheskel Landau and said, are we allowed to do an autopsy on this dead body in order to figure out what went wrong? Because we want to prevent ourselves making the same mistake on the next guy who's got gallstones. Is that pikuach nefesh? Are we allowed to perform the operation? Do you hear the question?
Indeed, yes.
I think I remember arguing the last time also that if it's not like immediately something,
Oh!
it's really like
What do you
say.
David Boaz? Do you know David Boaz?
I forgot the word in English. I forgot my language.
Somebody's
If somebody's after you try to kill you, that's because
Rodef.
For example, like I wouldn't. To my understanding, that's not people of nefesh actually. Like it's even though you try to prevent like other deaths from that, but my understanding people of nefesh is something that it happens right now.
Oh,
And then you're allowed to
excellent.
do something.
So the Noda B'Yehuda, Rav Yechezkel Landau, came up with a definition of Pikuach Nefesh that holds true until today. Now, our topic is not on the topic of Pikuach Nefesh today, and therefore we're only going to mention this one piece of the puzzle, which is Pikuach Nefesh, and maybe another week we could spend time talking about Pikuach Nefesh. But his idea is as follows. Pikuach Nefesh, I'll just give an introduction, is like fight. It's a very dangerous idea. I could justify almost anything by saying it is Pikuach Nefesh. For example, I have a daughter. You haven't met. I'll introduce you to her. Her name's Shira. Shira, our daughter, is studying nursing. Now, let's say she has an exam and she has to check some stuff up. So can we say that for her to prepare for her exams, she should be allowed to study on Shabbat, because eventually she'll pass the exam, she'll become a nurse, and she'll save lives. Or a doctor, or let's say I work in a pharmaceutical company, and if we were to work 7 days a week, we would produce more medications than if we worked 6 days a week. So that's also Pikuach Nefesh. So I could come up with a very wide definition of Pikuach Nefesh and end up sort of compromising Shabbat. Therefore, the Noda B'Yehuda came up with a very clear definition of when is Pikuach Nefesh and when it isn't. He said, when are you allowed to perform this operation, this gallstones autopsy? You're allowed to do the gallstones autopsy on person A, we'll call him Reuven. So you can do the autopsy on Reuven only if Shimon, whoever that might be, is waiting to do the operation. So then I'm saying, I'm performing the autopsy on Reuven in order to save the life of Shimon. So I'm allowed to do something, I'm allowed to transgress halakha if I know that in my transgressing of halakha, I'm saving the life of a particular person. But if I'm doing the operation because I want to know what to do, but there's not a particular person whose life I'm saving, then I wouldn't be allowed to break halakha. So the autopsy on Reuven is only permitted if I can save the life of Shimon. But if there's no Shimon, it's just so that I know what might happen in the future, then I wouldn't be allowed to do the autopsy. Is that clear? In short, a Pikuach Nefesh, you need a Nefesh. You follow? Does that make sense to you? Now, just in that context, everybody, I might remind you, and this is a really, really important idea, particularly for people, for all of us. And this is in the Shulchan Aruch, when he talks about breaking Shabbat for Pikuach Nefesh, the word of the Rav Yosef Cairo is not that you are allowed to break Shabbat in order to save a life. Do you know what the word is? You must. It's a mitzvah to break Shabbat. You follow? I only mention this. There's people who are entering the world of Shabbat might be hesitant. I can't lift up my phone. Look, I created Shabbat today. Understand that if it is, life-threatening situation, then you're not allowed to. You are required to. When I was 18 and I was in Shiva, they used to have something. I don't know if they still exist nowadays. Do you know what an electric blanket is? Do they still exist? Do you know what that is even? Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah. Weird one.
It's like a blanket with a heating element. You plug it in and it heats up. Have you ever? Do they still exist?
Yeah,
Do they exist?
Yeah,
We don't need them in Israel, but
Yeah.
Like the same as we're selling this in Canada.
So you're not getting into
Some
freezing
pillow,
beds,
electric
warm
pillow.
beds.
I was selling this in Canada too.
I think
Oh.
Electric pillow
with
and
that.
this.
Electric pillows, electric. Anyway.
In this
Not
circuit,
electric, like you put it
Mattress.
with hot
On my
water and then
blanket,
it
at
gets
first.
like.
It's on the mattress.
No. This
Right?
is you plug it in like you plug in your bed.
No, it's like a
So it's not
liquid
over you,
inside.
it's on the just for the mattress. It's not to heat you. It's to heat the mattress.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there was a guy and he was recently became religious, and it was his first Friday night or second Friday night, and he plugged in his electric match or whatever it was. Anyway, it was Friday night and he forgot to unplug it, and it caught fire.
Oh.
Now he was in bed, and he was reluctant to put out the fire because you're not allowed to put out fires on Shabbat. You have to be very careful when you are in a. I think sometimes when it's Shabbat and you find yourself in a, God forbid, chas v'sholom, you find yourself in a tricky situation. So I'm so cautious. I might be too cautious, and the guy ends up burning his legs, and he was like took a while to recover, but only because he waited, like he hesitated. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch writes, you're not allowed, you are required, it's a mitzvah. Because you have to understand that sometimes, halakha 99% of the time tells us do A, but in a life-threatening situation, you have to be ready to make that switch quickly. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. So, I want to summarize what we said in part 1. Part 1, we've given 4 arguments against organ donation. We spoke about deriving benefit, delay of burial, disgrace of the dead, and stealing. But then we said we push all of those aside for the sake of pikuach nefesh, right? Because in our situation, there is a Shimon there. Nachon?
Always.
Exactly. Exactly. You're quite, nowadays that's certainly the case. Let's say in the 18th century, it could be that a hospital in London may not know what's going on in a hospital in Melbourne. But nowadays, if I'm in my hospital in London and something went wrong, so the information that I might discover, there's certainly, it's a terrible, but the world is much smaller nowadays, so there will be a person somewhere who will learn from from whatever information we got that will save a particular person's life right now, and therefore it is easier to allow autopsies because it is. I mean, you need to have a person whose life you are saving, but it's much easier nowadays to find that person than it was in the 18th century. You follow? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so our point number 1 is we found quite a strong justification. Saving lives will allow us, we have the halachic, I don't know what the word is, stamp of approval that in theory an organ donation should be permitted because we're not worried about disgrace of the dead. We're not worried about delaying the burial. We're not worried about stealing. We're not worried about any of these concerns because all of these concerns are pushed away for pikuach nefesh, as we saw in the case of the Noda B'Yehuda.
So right now we're talking about organ donation after 120, after the age of 120. So why that particular age right now? What's the significance?
You're right. So there are two discussions. One discussion is, let's say, people want to donate organs when they're alive. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, for example, 2 kidneys, but apparently you can do with 1. So, are you allowed to donate your 1 kidney? So that's another discussion. That debate is not the same as this debate. That debate that we could have another week, but the sides over there are, when I save somebody else's life, to what extent do I have to put myself in danger in order to save somebody else? So the Gemara talks about, for example, if somebody is drowning in a river and I'm not an Olympic swimmer, do I have an obligation to jump into the water to try and save them? Meaning, am I allowed to put myself in a potentially am I allowed to compromise my health in order to save somebody else's life? Obviously, we do everything we can in order to save another person's life, but am I allowed to push my own life so that my life is in danger in order to save somebody else's life? And that's really the issue over there concerning, to what extent can you push? Oh, there's never an answer. There are
Come on,
opinions.
you cannot do
There are
like
different
this. You
opinions.
said like this and you cannot give an answer.
Ah,
It supposed to be yes or no.
no,
But me,
it's
I
really.
mean, with many people, I helped them, they took me down, Next time I don't help nobody. I say fuck it, Screaming from a balcony.
I don't really understand what you're saying. Truth be
This what
told.
is, I prefer not to help nobody. Excuse me from a bedlam. If I will be in position, I'm not gonna be a swimmer. I see somebody like
You wouldn't
I
jump
will
in.
not help. No. Any second. Because I did it before in my life, and they took me down together with them, And I know it's like.
Uh-huh.
So this is why I'm asking you for the answer.
So the truth is, it's quite a
For me, I got
complex.
the answer in my
So
life,
the truth is, it's quite a complicated question. Right. No. So the truth is, it's quite a complicated question, and I think there are different opinions among halachic authorities.
The most question is the question of the question.
Right. No, that's certainly a very, very important factor. Really, there's so many. If we sort of widen it to,
Like in business, you're not gonna help nobody.
I don't know.
Personal life, in somebody.
So there's often a question of sort of when I have a debate between doing the right thing and the wrong thing. So then you just need like strength of character to do the right thing. But over here we're talking about where I've got two options and both of them seem to be the right thing. I have an obligation to look after myself. I also have an obligation to look after him. And then which one is going to, which one's going to prevail? I think the fact that, so the fact that there is no one clear halachic sort of ruling, there is no consensus around halachic authorities saying everyone says do A and everyone says no, do B. I think reflects different, like you said, like your life experience has brought you into here, and other people's life experiences have taken them elsewhere, and because of that variety, there is no clear halachic decision there. But in order to to go into all the factors, it would take too much of our time in this week's discussion. So we'll postpone the discussion of organ donation when you are alive to another week, and also to give us time to really flesh out the different factors that allow us, with which to.
China in the business of organ donation and organ cuts.
Okay, so I want to talk now about somebody who's left this world. So let's say concerning donating a kidney after 120, there's really very little halachic debate on that. It's very, here's somebody after 120 that has the opportunity to bring life to another person. A kidney can be removed after all halachic positions consider the person to have left this world, and therefore a kidney donation after 120 is really not. So there's very little halachic opposition to that. What the situation in which it does become complicated is something like a heart or lungs. And the reason why heart and lungs are more complicated is because a heart and lungs, once the heart stops beating, so then you can't remove the heart anymore. And once the heart stops beating, the lungs are no longer working. So really, removing the heart is causing the heart to stop beating. You follow? So we have to understand in halakha, how does halakha define the end of life? And when we understand how halakha defines the end of life, I can then understand which organs can I donate. Because if I say that when the heart stops beating, that is death, so then as long as the heart is beating, the guy's still alive, then I wouldn't be allowed to remove the heart. You follow? Okay. So the second part of our discussion, now that we sort of have a theoretical stamp of approval, the second question is defining the end of life. Okay, so concerning defining the end of life, we're going to look, it's very interesting, we're going to look at a Mishnah, sei gesund, We're going to look at a Mishnah that leads to the Shulchan Aruch, and then afterwards a much more recent halachic opinion. So there's a Mishnah in Masechet Yoma that talks about a person who is outdoors and it's on Shabbat, and there is an avalanche, and this person, I guess somebody else sees, they're behind them, and they see the avalanche lands on the person, right? Mi shenafla alav mapolet, safek hu sham, safek eino sham. I'm not sure if he's there or if he's not there. Safek chai, safek met. I'm not sure if he's alive. I'm not sure if he has left this world. Safek oved kochavim. I'm not sure if he's an idol worshipper or if he's Jewish. Mefakchin alav et hagal. So the Mishnah tells us you're allowed to remove the stones on Shabbat. Now, stones on Shabbat, as you know, are muktzah machmat gufo. It's one of the stricter levels of muktzah. If you walk down the street, you're not allowed to pick up rocks. A rock is muktzah machmat gufo on Shabbat because I've got no use for it on Shabbat. It's not part of my Shabbat world. So all of these rocks that have fallen down, I'm not allowed to move them on Shabbat because they're muktzah. However, if I think there might be somebody underneath, then of course you're allowed to move them in order to save that person's life. You follow? Now, the question is, if the person has died, so then removing the rocks won't bring him back to life anymore. You follow? So the only reason why I'm allowed to remove the rocks is because I hope that removing the rocks will help save his life. But if he's already left this world, then I wouldn't be allowed to remove the rocks because the rocks are muktzah and I wouldn't be saving his life. And then after Shabbat, you would stand there, obviously, say Tehillim, and then after Shabbat, you would then remove the rocks and you would bury him. You follow?
Who knows he's dead?
Excellent. So what do you do? So now in source number 8 tells us you have to check if he's dead. And this is how the Gemara comes to define how do you check if the guy's alive or not. You follow? Okay, Tanu Rabbana, the rabbis taught us. Ad heichanu hu bodek. How far do you check to see if he's alive or not? Ad chotmo. Okay, ad chotmo. Chotmo is his belly, meaning if you see if he's breathing, if the guy is able to breathe. V'yesh omrim ad libo. Some say you check his heart. Le'inyan pikuach nefesh. Akar chiyuta ba'apei. Ikar chiyuta ba'apeihu. That the main part of your life is in your nose. Dichtiv v'kol asher nishmat ruach chayim ba'apo. As long as a person is breathing. So what do I do? Explains the Gemara. You check the nose. As we know that the soul comes into the body when someone is born, comes in through the nose, and after 120, the person, when the soul leaves, it comes out of the nose as well, meaning that the nose is the point of entry and the point of exit. So you check the guy's nose. Is he breathing? The Mishnah says, if he's breathing, that means he's alive. If he's stopped breathing, that means he's left this world. You follow? Okay. That's what you do. Okay. Now the Shulchan Aruch adds, even if he's like spluttering and he's only going to live for another minute, then you're allowed to move the stone. I mean, it doesn't matter if he's going to live for a minute or an hour or 100 years. As long as you still see that there's, he's still able to breathe, there's some sort of ability to breathe, then you would continue removing the rocks. So, according to the Mishnah, and then the Gemara, and then the Shulchan Aruch, defining life is the guy breathing? That's the question. If he's breathing, that means he's alive, even if he's hardly breathing, even if it's weak, and even if he'll need, assistance. But as long as there's potential for breathing, then he's alive. If he's not breathing, then he's not alive. You follow? So the definition of life is breathing. Is that clear? That is the definition of life according to the Mishnah and according to the Shulchan Aruch. Is that clear to everybody? Now, I'm not a physician, but you could have a person who is no longer breathing, but the heart might still be beating, meaning the blood might still be pumping through the body, but the person's no longer able to breathe.
By themselves.
By themselves, exactly. Now, in that situation, we would say, according to what we've read just now, that the guy is dead because he's no longer able to breathe. But the heart might still be breathing, which means I'd be allowed to remove the heart from somebody and you'd be able to do a heart transplant on this person, based on the sources we've seen so far. Is that clear? Now, the position, the halachic position to define death changed. I wouldn't say it was sort of, there was a part two. Really, normally in deciding halakha, you start with the Mishnah, Gemara, Shulchan Aruch. But then there is an extra piece of story, a little bit more to the story here. There was a famous case that happened in a city called Mecklenburg. I'm not sure if it's mentioned over here.
Russia.
Is it?
Mecklenburg, I'm not sure.
Okay, Mecklenburg. The rabbi that was asked the question was a rabbi who lived in Hungary. He lived in Hungary, and what happened was, there was this terrible situation that was happening in 18th century Mecklenburg. What happened was, people were being buried before they'd actually died, and then they would cry, and then that's why at one stage in this town, and maybe even later on, that when they would bury people, they would bury them with a string attached to a bell, so that if the guy would wake up, he could ring the bell, and everyone would realize we made a terrible mistake, and they would, take him out again. So there was a big concern that people were being buried when they weren't actually dead. Now, I just want to add one more point to this, and that is a lot of that ghost stories and all the Victorian novels that spoke about people climbing up from their graves is all from a time when it wasn't clear. Imagine mistakes were probably made. People who everybody assumed was dead, they would bury them, and then he was just sloughing, and he would, he'd climb out again. So the Duke of this town called Mecklenburg was in such a pickle as a result of people being buried when they weren't dead, that they in Mecklenburg instituted a new law. And the new law was that everybody who died had to be held in the morgue for 3 days. And then only after 3 days, if somebody's in the morgue for 3 days and nothing happens, they are definitely dead, and then you're allowed to bury them. The problem is, as we all know, you're not allowed to delay. No, but you're not allowed to delay a burial. Nachon? Kavod tikvorenu. We saw that in the first page of our source material. That when somebody dies, it's kilalat Hashem talui, created in God's image. You need to bury the dead as early as you can. Here in Yerushalayim, they are very, very particular not to have bodies overnight. That's why funerals take place here in Jerusalem 24 hours a day. You can go to a funeral at 3 o'clock in the morning here in Jerusalem, because they're very careful to bury at the first opportunity. It's sort of disrespectful for the city for there to be an unburied person in it. You follow? And so therefore this idea of having bodies for 3 days goes against everything that's important. The idea that you would bury a body with it's a delay for 3 days. It was terrible. So the Chatam Sofer, who was the rabbi in a city called Presburg in Hungary at the time, he opposed this idea. Oh, do you see this over here? If you have a look on the last paragraph over here, it was a debate between Chatam Sofer, who we can Rav Moshe Sofer, and Moses Mendelssohn, who you probably heard of. Anyway, so Moses Mendelssohn said they should wait for 3 days, and the Chatam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer, disagreed. Now, if you look in source number 10, he writes, the Chatam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer, said, we, the Jewish community, are not going to wait for 3 days. Rather, כל שאחר שמוטל כאבן דומם ואין לו שום דביקה. אם אחר כך בטל לנשימה, אין לנו אלא דברי תורתנו הקדושה, שהוא מת ולא ילין אותו, והמטמא לו, אם הוא כהן לוקח אחר ההתראה. He says, we Jews are not going to wait for 3 days. But as soon as the body is hard like a stone, and, interestingly, and there is no heartbeat, then we consider that person dead and you're allowed to bury them. So Rav Moshe Sofer has added an extra criteria that we didn't see in the Mishnah, saying that we Jews, when do we bury the dead? Once the heart has stopped beating. You follow? Meaning that when's death? After the heart's beating. Which means that I wouldn't be allowed to do a heart transplant, because as long as the heart's beating, according to what we see in the Chatam Sofer, the person is still alive. Is that clear? Yes.
What about Kas v'Shalom if the person died in Friday night or Friday, like?
So the truth is, that is a bit of an issue. I was once at a levaya about 10 minutes before Shabbat. Yeah, once there was a levaya they do levayot in Yerushalayim until the last second, like mamash right until Shabbat, so that they would not have the problem that you mentioned. You're right. Somebody passed on Friday night, then the levaya will be on a Motzei Shabbat. That's the only situation. Quite right. But if you shouldn't have to do these things, but if you go to the Batei Kfarot, the cemeteries here, Friday afternoon, if Chas v'Sholem it's necessary, they'll do levayot mamash until the last minute, in order to make sure that the dead are buried as early as possible. Okay, we saw just now. We looked at the Mishnah, we looked at the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch, and from there it seems that defining death is about breathing. After this historical, this story, this duke, the city of Mecklenburg, and the question that they asked to the Chatam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer, we see that the definition of death is not connected to breathing; it's to do with heartbeat. That is a critical difference that will have huge ramifications when we come to think about which organs we're allowed to donate and which we are not. Is that clear to everyone now?
Is that still the position today?
Oh, so we're going to come to today. But with these two ways of understanding the definition of death, is it connected to breathing or to the heart stop beating? So those two positions we've seen from the Mishnah to the Gemara to Shulchan Aruch to the writings of Rav Moshe Sofer. Is everything clear until now? Okay. Now, in terms of modern halachic rulings, there are three positions that I'm aware of today. The strictest of the three is really based on what we just saw from the Chatam Sofer, and that's the position of the Tzitz Eliezer. Tzitz Eliezer is Rav Eliezer Waldenberg, who was a rabbi who died maybe 20 years ago, but not that long ago, sort of in living memory, and he lived here in Jerusalem, lived near the Shuk. He was a dayan on the Jerusalem Beit Din, and he said, according to the position of the Chatam Sofer, we can't go against. He was the leader of the Jewish community in the 18th century, and he ruled that death only happens when the heart stops beating. Therefore, I wouldn't be allowed to do a heart transplant, because you can only take a beating heart, and once the heart starts beating, it's not, you can't use it for a transplant anymore. You follow? So he ruled that you're not allowed to do heart transplants. That's one extreme, the Tzitz Eliezer. The other extreme, I don't want to say the other extreme, but another position is Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein is very, very interesting. He wrote, I'm going to summarize, they're on the sheets, but I'm going to summarize it. Rav Moshe Feinstein wrote 2 responsa on this issue, and the 2 responsa were different. I'm not sure I think the first heart transplant took place in the 1960s. No, 1968. Right? And this question was asked in the 1970s. Now, the after that first heart transplant, I think the people lived really just for a couple of days or weeks after the transplant. In other words, when you did a heart transplant, you were ending the life of the donor, and you weren't really prolonging the life of the recipient by very, very much. Now therefore, Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his first approach, and that's in source number 12, he wrote, you're not allowed to do a heart transplant. And he said, when you do a heart transplant, you're killing the donor and the recipient, because neither of them will survive very long after this operation. Well, obviously the first guy is really going to die as a result of the operation, and the second guy, you're not really giving him. So you're sacrificing A and not really giving B very much. Then something quite dramatic happened. There was a new drug that was introduced in 1980. Our bodies are sort of like, there's one of the defense mechanisms is that when a foreign object enters the body, we expel it. So the body was not able to accept new organs. They would reject, and that's why the life expectancy of somebody who received a donated organ was very low. In 1980, that changed dramatically because the body became more willing, more able to accept, and if people were surviving for a couple of weeks after an operation, until that breakthrough in 1980, afterwards, people were surviving for years afterwards. Then, so the second tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, his first one was written in the 70s, the second one was written in the 1980s, and what's so interesting is the medical advances caused him to change his mind. He can see that when you do this heart transplant, the person who I thought was going to live for a couple of weeks is now, Baruch Hashem, has been given a new lease of life. And he, Rav Moshe Feinstein, basing his ruling on the position of the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch, that it's not the heartbeat that determines whether you're alive or not, but rather your independent breathing. If you're able to breathe or not, that's what determines if you're alive or not. Based on that, Rav Moshe Feinstein permits organ donation, even heart, because of the reasons that we just gave, following the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Shulchan Aruch. So those are the 2 sorts of extremes. You've got no, which is Rav Eliezer Waldenberg, and you've got yes in the second tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Is that clear? There's a third position that's sort of somewhere in the middle, and that is the position of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach also, he lived at the same time as Rav Moshe Feinstein. He died maybe, 30 or 40 years ago. He lived also in Yerushalayim, in Sharei Chesed. He wasn't convinced that the heartbeat is not the end of life. He was waiting for a clearer medical proof that that a person who is really, it's the difference between brain death, which was the original death, and sort of when the heart stops beating. So Rav Moshe Feinstein was saying that brain death is death because they're not able to breathe anymore, even if the heart is still beating, but they're not capable. There's no communication between the brain and the rest of the body. They're not breathing. So brain death is death. That's Rav Moshe Feinstein. And then Rav Eliezer Waldenberg said, no, it's when the heart stops beating, Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was looking for more evidence that brain death is death. At the time of his writing in the 1980s, he wasn't yet convinced that brain death is death, but he left open the possibility that if there was a time in the future that doctors felt that they could prove without a shadow of doubt, that at a certain stage there was no more brain activity and that the person is dead. Yeah, the brain is dead. Although, see, his question was, is it that the brain is dead or that there's no communication between the brain and the body? You see, everybody agrees that there's no connection between the brain and the body anymore. That's why the guy can't breathe. But maybe the brain is functioning. Maybe the guy is reviewing Gemara in his mind. Maybe he's steiging. Maybe he's davening. Who knows what's going on in his mind? So, so excellent. So nowadays, there's a debate on what Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach would say today. When he ruled in the 1980s, it wasn't clear what was going on in the brain. It was clear that there's no connection between the brain and the body, but it wasn't clear to him that the brain had ceased to function. But he opened the possibility that if people would be able to discover that the brain is no longer functioning, then he was open to the possibility of allowing heart transplants.
So he would rule that brain death equals death.
If doctors were able to prove that there was no more brain function, I mean, you have like two extremes, and that is Rav Moshe Feinstein, that was considered brain death as death, and Rav Eliezer Waldenberg, who followed the Khatam Sofer and said, no, as long as the heart is beating, the guy's alive. And then this position in the middle, meaning I'm open to that position, but we're going to need great advances in medical research to confirm brain death is death.
It's complicated because there's I think the brain stem, which is responsible for like the automatic systems like the heartbeat and breathing.
Right.
You can be consciously dead, but part of the brain will just so a person they call it a permanent vegetative state.
Yes.
Like they're a vegetable, but their heart is breathing, their heart is functioning, they're breathing, but they'll never wake up because they're like most of the brain is actually just.
Nachon. Yeah, no. So it was really quite a complicated discussion of how to define. In general, I don't know. It's a very, very delicate question on which to rule, and the purpose of our discussion is not to say, well, now let's do X or let's do Y, or now that it's, but really to understand a little bit some of the factors involved in the decision making, and then also based on those factors involved in the decision making, understand how halachic authorities make their rulings. I think what's particularly interesting is the change in the position of Rav Moshe Feinstein. He had a position before the discovery of this drug where he ruled against, and then after the discovery of the drug where he was more lenient. It's interesting to see how medical research has an impact on halachic rulings. So, sweet, wonderful people, I want to summarize. We're talking about really quite a heavy topic today, and that is the topic of organ donation. We started by talking about factors against it versus the power of pikuach nefesh, and we spoke about how powerful the concept of pikuach nefesh, particularly in the ruling of the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau, who said pikuach nefesh is permitted as long as there's a nefesh, meaning I can cut up the body of Reuven as long as I'm saving the life of Shimon. But if there's no Shimon, then I wouldn't be allowed to do anything to the body of Reuven. But of course, in organ donation, unfortunately, there is a Shimon, and therefore you would be allowed to do what you need to in the body of Reuven. That was sort of the general background to give us a general stamp of approval on the idea of organ donation. But then we went to really a much more specific definition of trying to understand what's the moment of death. And we looked at really two positions. One based on the avalanche, and the Mishnah avalanche about removing the stones on Shabbat, that you check, you check the nose. We said the nose is the point of entry and exit. If a person is capable of independent breathing, if they're breathing, then they're alive. If they're not capable, then they're not alive. That's the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. And then this story that happens in the 18th century in this town of Mecklenburg, where the Jewish community turned to the Chatam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer, didn't want to delay burial, and he, in order to allow burial of the Jewish community and not wait for 3 days, he presented a second definition that said as hard as stone and the heart is not beating, which is a much more limiting in terms of donations afterwards. And then really the debate since then has been, am I going to follow the position of the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Shulchan Aruch and the definition concerning breathing? And what weight do I give to the position of the Chatam Sofer, the leader of the Jewish world in the 18th century, in his definition? So according to Rav Waldenberg, he gives a lot of weight to the position of the Chatam Sofer, and therefore he comes out very strict on the topic of organ donation. Then we have Rav Moshe Feinstein, his two positions, but the second position, after the development of the drug, was closer to the position of the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch about breathing. And then in the middle, between those two, sort of you have Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who's interested to see to what extent can we be sure, in light of research that's happened in the last 300 years since the writing of the Chatam Sofer, how can modern research on understanding the point of death have an impact on giving our ruling? And he's at the time of his passing, about 30 years ago, he ruled that you're not allowed to do heart transplants. But it could be that medical research has been able to prove the moment of death closer to the definition in the Mishnah, in which case it's possible that even in his position, he would agree with Rav Moshe Feinstein to allow organ donation. We're not giving any rulings here, we're just mentioning the different arguments, but you are strongly advised to consult, a halachic authority on these issues in order to make a decision of what you think is the appropriate thing to do. Any questions? Joy, happiness? I mean, in the context of death. Okay. Have a wonderful day. Yishar koach to all of you.